I was trying to decide whether to do slides for this, and I decided not to because there's a lot of chunks of information here, small chunks of information. They're related, but I figured either I'd have to do a million bullet point slides or none at all. And so what I will do is I'll make this available to you afterwards so that you'll have it and can refer back to it. You're also free to use whatever we do tonight to help train your people. Please do. The more people we can get trained doing this, the better off it's going to be for all of us. And we're not going to really focus much on framing tonight because we do that every other one. This, I have a background in organizing also, and so this is more of an organizing thing, a non-framing thing. But certainly framing is very important. I encourage you to learn it. We are talking about doing another workshop, and there'll be one. We may actually do an in-person one here in Minnesota, and then I'm thinking we would do an online one too. And what the workshop is it's a 3.5 hour workshop, which is a lot more fun in person, obviously, but not everybody can do that. And we go over what framing is all about, talk about George Lakoff's view on how to approach this. And then we do a thing we call stop, drop, and roll, which is just an easy way to remember what to do to create a very good message. We're not going to do much of that or pretty much any of that tonight, but that's coming up. The other thing I wanted to mention was that I've been speaking to Antonia Scatton, and some of you were on a webinar with her, and we're contemplating doing, and we're real interested in your feedback on that. Send us an email or throw something in the chat. What we're talking about is for the summer when we normally kind of cut back because we don't want the candidates getting mad at us for taking volunteers out of the field to attend to Zoom. But what we're thinking of doing is something we're calling office hours. And the idea would be we would just be on once every other week, and we would then let candidates come in and campaigns come in and just ask questions, maybe bring a lit piece or something they're working on, and we would do what we could to help out with messaging advice on that, which I think is instructive in itself. And so when we would, they could do just like you guys did, sign up for free if you feel like throwing in $1 or $2.
Right.
It helps Lisa and I get a meal here and there. And that's it. Joe, did you have a question?
No, Barb does though. Barb's had her hand raised for a while.
Barb.
Hi guys. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
All right. I love the George Lakoff books, which you, George Green, recommended to me years and years ago.
Yep.
And they are awesome. And I just want to bring up the gal from Michigan who said, I am a white suburban Christian mom, and that's okay to say in the DFL party. We've gotten so afraid of saying, I am a white Christian suburban mom, and I support the DFL platform. And the DFL platform is a platform created by, say what you want, it's created by Jesus. Feed the hungry, heal the sick, take care of the widow and the orphans. And why has the DFL party gotten so afraid of saying that this is who we are and what we stand for and what we believe in? And if we're ever going to bring back in those rural Democrats, that I think we have to start getting that message through, like the Michigan gal did. And I've been saying this on DFL sites for a long time. I'm a Christian. I believe in the DFL platform because this is what our platform stands for. And why are we so afraid to say that, to stand for
Yep.
that?
And I'm, a couple of things. One, here, and for those who are not in Minnesota, the DFL is the Democratic Farmer Labor Party. That's who the Democrats are in Minnesota. And for what it's worth, and we are, I've been involved with the platform committee here in Minnesota to update little sentences that came after each area in the platform. So whether it was rural or whether it's farming or agriculture or human rights or healthcare, whatever it is, there's always been a little statement about it up top. And we've rewritten those to add framing and all around values. Exactly what you're talking about, Barbara. We'll be showing that at the state convention. And also the Wyoming Democrats are, I mentioned this and they want to see if I've already shared some of our drafts, looks like they may pick it up too. So I'm hoping this goes a little farther. Lisa and I will be meeting with the Democratic state chairs from around the country. And it turns out there are 57 of them because there's 7 territories and other such things. So we'll be meeting with them in Seattle in a week and a half and bringing some of that up. So that's good news. The other thing I would point out, now that you mentioned Mallory McMorris, is I thought she looked familiar. And so I went back into our database and sure enough, we went to Michigan and spent a week there with their CD11 Indivisible and the local Democratic group. And we did 2 days of training. We trained 100 activists, 13 candidates. We had the state party chair and others there. And this was in 2017. And she was one of the people we trained. So I kind of hope that was it. Catherine, did you? Oh, I saw Catherine popped up there for a minute, but yeah. So I mean, I don't know if what we did was the impetus for any of that, but it looks like she messaged very well. If you haven't seen this, take a good look at it. Mallory McMorris, I believe is the last name, and just amazing. What she said is what all of us should say. She's also not afraid to throw a punch and to say what needs to be said. We can't worry about making the Republicans mad. We can't worry. We need to speak the truth at this point because this may be some of the last points we have to say these things. So we need to be doing this. So I thought I'd push that out. One other thing we're looking at that we'll probably do during this office hours idea is also doing, for lack of a better term at this point, a viral push. And the idea is that between Antonia Scatton and myself, and we will probably bring in a couple of other groups in Chicago, Wisconsin, and in Michigan. And the idea would be to come up with some messages that are important in the moment, and then have our groups push them all out at the same time through social media. And we would add either some hashtag or some unique language so that if we saw that this made it, we'd be pretty sure that it was something we generated. And I like that idea because it lets all of us participate in coming up with some messages and then pushing them out and seeing what the results are. So these are some ideas, but I think they're fairly easy to implement. Antonia and I have been talking about it for quite a while. And so, and I met with her in Phoenix a few weeks ago. And so I think it sounds like fun to me. So if you guys are in, then we'll do it. Okay, but let's start on tonight's one-to-many thing. And we all used to doing one-on-one with voters or at the door or on the phone, but we also do one-to-many on social media and on other platforms that maybe you're not always thinking about. I've already encouraged you to learn framing. It's very important because otherwise all the things you learn here will be nigh on useless if you don't practice making messages that actually work. So that's important. We do have videos and print material at connectionslab.org and our YouTube channel where you can also find links to upcoming webinars and workshops. So to get rolling, let's just start with something we're all used to, and it's an old standard, one-to-many kind of communication, which is the letter to the editor. And I think this is a good model to start with because I think it'll put your head in the right place. And then when we talk about other kinds of one-to-many communication, a lot of this will apply. I'll start off by saying that this was this first part of this I'm calling what editors look for. This was written by Jeremy Powers, and Jeremy Powers was a reporter at the Minneapolis Star-Tribune for a number of years, and also a solid Democrat. And he and I worked on this thing together, but this part he wrote entirely. And so let's talk about when you're writing a letter to the editor, it's a good idea to think about what the editors look for. And Jeremy sat on the editorial board, so he knows what they look for. So he says, and here are a bunch of bullet points. Number one, letters to the editor go on the opinion page. Make them well-reasoned opinions. Say why you care. Stand strong and be direct. Don't use weasel words. Don't apologize for your views or discount them. Editors also love a reaction to a story they've recently run. To them, this is dialogue. That's, I think, an important one to remember. So it's a good idea to mention, if you're writing, look for an article you can respond to, mention the article. In this article entitled such and such by so-and-so last Tuesday, this was said. Here's what I have to say about it. You kind of want to go one topic per letter. I'll talk more about this later, but you don't want to go on, and be specific and don't ramble. We liberals have quite a, well, this is something we do. We tend to ramble, as I'm doing right now. Also, don't name call. You can criticize or even insult, but do so with declarative sentences, not snarky words. I think that's important because sometimes people will just stop listening to you if they think you're attacking somebody else by being snarky. But the well-placed and well-worded insult, those are golden, and it can be all sorts of fun. You want to appeal to a large audience of readers and assume that everyone is on your side. As you're thinking about the tone of your letter, just assume everybody's on your side. And take the moral high road. Okay, this is really important. Have someone review your letter. But don't let that person talk you out of making your point or sending it. Another set of eyes, though, can keep you focused. I also highly recommend putting it aside overnight and reading it the next morning. I can't tell you how many times that saved my keister. Also, right-size the letter to the media outlet. Don't ask the Metro newspaper to publish a letter about library branch hours in a small suburb. That should go in the community papers. Likewise, your local weekly probably won't run a letter about a statewide bonding bill with nothing local in it. So think about what you're saying. If you're going to really rant about Republicans, generally what they're doing, don't send it to your local paper. They probably aren't going to print it anyway. And lastly, Jeremy says the ideal letter to the editor puts in words something where the reporter was thinking when she or he wrote the story, but knew they couldn't put it in the story without crossing the line from news to opinion. And I think that's the strongest thing in here. Imagine that the reporters are giving you this information. They want to tell you what they think about it, but they can't. That's your job. So think about that. Any questions on that? Hearing none, seeing none, we'll move on. The other thing on letters to the editor is standing. This is really important. Letters are great, but if you are a person with standing, you may get to write a longer opinion piece or a rebuttal. Standing simply means that through your job, your credentials, and or your connection to a newsworthy event, an editor believes you can speak with authority and credibility on a subject. For example, if the issue is ethics in government, a former judge has standing. If the issue is the environment, your position as chair of an environmental group would give you standing. And a teacher has standing on local education issues. So if you do not have standing, you might recruit someone who does if you'd like to see a longer piece in the paper. In fact, let me give you an idea of lengths of things. Obviously how much you say depends on how much room you have. So notice that there are differences in this. For example, a tweet is 280 characters, not words, but 280 characters. A Facebook post is maybe 20 words before it goes to the little more thing to read more. A letter to the editor is 250 words. That's pretty standard all around. An opinion piece or a half-hour speech is about 2,500 words. A speech may be a little longer. You might get to 4,500 or so. So keep that in mind. And actually, I think it's great practice to attempt to make a message that can fit in a tweet. Think about that. When you're making messages, try to think about, if I had to tweet this, what would I write? We'll talk about that a little bit more. So that's about letters to the editor. And like I say, you want to keep in mind that you can probably get into a local paper really easily. If you bother reading them at all, not everybody does, but if you do, you'll notice that many weeks during the year, there are no letters to the editor. It's not because they decided not to print them, it's because no one sent any in. So it's really, really easy to get into a local paper, especially if you're persistent. And their bar for standing may be a little less. Sometimes if you offer an opinion piece, they may just print it because they don't have a lot of copy that week. And they would like it. You come up with some kind of credibility, some reason that you might deserve this, some experience you've had, and ask them. You might get it. Doesn't hurt to ask.
George?
Sure. Yes.
We have questions, so I'm gonna start with Ron.
Okay, Ron.
Thank you, folks. Quick question. If your goal, purpose of the letter to the editor is different, what's the rule of thumb on a strategy, specifically writing to inform versus writing to persuade?
Okay.
Any rules of thumb there on how you approach those?
It depends on the publication. There are not a lot, I shouldn't say not a lot. Some newspapers don't really want somebody just using it as a sandbox and just standing up and saying something that's not related to an issue of the day or something the paper has covered. And so being very informative in that way may not work well in a letter to the editor. However, it might work really well as an opinion or as an op-ed or a rebuttal, a longer one, because in that you have the legs to go, or you have the room to go and add education in along with your opinion. And I'm sorry, what was the other part of that, Ron? It was to persuade.
Inform or persuade. Specifically, the inform part is you may have seen an op-ed or an article or something written in a publication where you're saying, wait a minute, that's only, because I saw one yesterday, that's only half the story. And I'm thinking to myself, there was an article about, how to start a business. And I read that and they had some good points, but I wrote to a friend, hey, wait a minute, they forgot a whole boatload of stuff. So if I were to write something and say, but what about this? But that would be informing. I would want to inform the newspaper staff and then vicariously through to the reader. There's all this other stuff you should consider when starting a business, which was the topic of the article, rather than to persuade. But in what we're talking about here in politics and candidacy and policy, it might be more of a persuasive exercise. Just wanting some thoughts about that.
I think it can be both. I mean, our purposes here, we are trying to persuade, but there's no reason we can't persuade with a little information. And what in your example, there is an article. And it's always a good idea, if you can, to refer back to something the paper has reported on or an opinion piece the paper has had. And then you have the opportunity to say, in the article, that was a great article on small business. There are a few points that would be good to add to that. Here's my information. This is important to me because, and then state why. So then you've added your opinion. And so in our world here, we are trying to persuade. So as you say that, you may be illuminating that point in a way that does persuade a voter to think differently about something, especially business articles. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes tend to lean right. And you may be able to pull that back and make your point and show where this person's article was, gently suggest that they're wrong, or even strongly suggest that they're wrong. Tom.
Yeah, thanks for taking my, it's kind of a little bit more, not so much of a question, but about a month and a half ago, I did have actually a letter printed in our local paper. And basically I followed one of the formats that you use where you talk about your values. And it really hit me because I really believe that we are screwing our future generations over and over again. And I brought that up in the article about the surplus, how they want to divvy it up here and there. And, rather than spend it on education where it should be, it's all over the place. But the other thing, so I want to recommend, if you have, go to your site and follow some of those, I would call them recipes for doing the messaging. They work really well for letters to the editor. And in our local paper, it's 350 words tops, which is another 100 words beyond what you've got in some of them. So you can actually get a pretty good message formulated. Yeah. But the other thing, if any of you are officers or directors within your local Senate district in Minnesota or other places, you can write news releases and send them in. We just did that in our SD 35, where we endorsed 3 of our candidates going forward. And I put together a piece for that, and it got published this past week, pretty much verbatim. But the other thing I would suggest is my English skills are probably not the finest, but I have a friend who is a retired English teacher. So it's always great to have somebody with those skills to review your letter.
Even if your skills are very good, I still recommend you have somebody else read it. It's absolutely amazing when you're writing how close you get to it, to the point where you just don't see things anymore. And it makes sense in your head, but it doesn't. I'll come back the next day and I'll go, and usually what happens, first things that happen is I see mistakes in flow. The particular way that I wrote it is not flowing clearly. And just because I messed up a couple words or used a cliche, and those pop out right away. And then, but giving it to somebody else, they'll see something that you didn't, and that will probably spur you to say it in a different way that'll be more powerful. So highly recommend doing that. Sleep on it, let somebody else look at it. Those are good tips for writing anything, especially for this, because you're putting yourself out there in a one-to-many situation. Any mistake you make, you're making in front of a lot of people. So you kind of want to get some help on that. And Barbara, did you have another question?
Just a quick tip. In these small rural communities, you can get to know your editor very well. And my local editor, he always votes Democrat for governor and pretty much state officials, but then he votes Republican on the bottom ticket. So in these small districts, you can get to know your editor just by having a cup of coffee, talking casual, get their feedback of how they're feeling, and you can find out that information. And when you do, and so you kind of, okay, our editor goes Republican on the smaller tickets, but he goes Democrat on the bigger tickets. So he's happy then to push those opinion pages like on the bigger tickets rather than the smaller tickets. And he might allow you, you know, uh, something not too controversial on the smaller tickets if you're careful and cautious with your wording. But on the
Sure.
bigger tickets, you can kind of go a little further.
That's a really good point, getting to
So
know,
get to know your editor.
and the
And
reporters.
it's not hard to do in a 1,200
Right.
population town.
You
Get
know,
to
it
know
isn't
your
hard to
editor.
do in our town of 80,000, because all of us know the particular reporter that covers the local political scene. And so what's nice about that is you get a couple of letters in there. If they're well-written, if they're informative, then when they're looking at doing this, they will probably pick your letter. And then you can also say, you know, I'm involved in this stuff, Kevin. You know,
Right.
let me write an opinion piece on this. That's a great idea. For the
Right.
local papers, this is not impossible. And you see these people, you
Right.
go to a city council meeting, school board, you see them, you say,
Yep.
hi, that's a great idea.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
let's, was there another question or not? If not,
I have a quick
Sure.
thought. Yeah, George. So about what just Barbara said, those down ballot races have become so crucial now with the war on education and critical thinking, analytical thinking. But besides that, I'm hoping that someday we will give just a little less priority to educating, informing, educating, and even persuading, to basically pushing moral buttons. And so I'm hoping someday we do more of that. But if we just do like all the sandwiches that you went over, you know, and the webinar, you know, the truth sandwich and all the, you know, so you just start with the high, you know, the high ground, the high moral ground, and then you go into name the villain and the facts and informing. Then I think that would go a long ways, and always tie to we're all in it together. You know, one way or another, we're stronger together.
Yeah, I think sometimes when we've been talking about this, it's easy to come away with the idea that, you know, that we are always pushing a positive message, which gives the impression that maybe we shouldn't go and poke it or throw a punch. You know, we don't want to spend our time rebutting these guys when we know that they baited us into doing it, which is a lot of it. But there's no reason to just come out swinging sometime, not in response to something they said, just come out swinging. As Ken Martin, DNC vice chair and chair of the Minnesota Democratic Party, he said, you know, we cannot be afraid to throw a punch. And he's right. And I see something from Patty popped up here real quick. What moral buttons do we need to be pushing? You know, go back over the list of the moral values that we have and push those, and just take a punch when those values are being violated. And the Republicans are very good at telling us exactly what they're doing by accusing us of doing it. Well, they do the same thing with values. They will claim to have certain values, but those are their words. Their actions violate those values. So don't be afraid to go back and point out the violations. And like Mallory McMorris did, I mean, she just came right out and said, here it is. This is what you guys are doing, and it's wrong. And that's you know, I'll be sure to get a link to that in the follow-up that Lisa will send out. Okay. All right. Let me roll on here. Okay, so let's talk about just kind of things that help you write compelling messages. This is good advice just for writing in general, but I've kind of tweaked it for what we're doing. And the first thing I got to say is that even if you are an expert,
first thing we need to do before.
Your letter will not be effective if you bore people. And this is important. This is something that I find we have a hard time with on our side because we're so much into the facts and into the reasoning behind it. We think scientifically, so we fall into this thing, and workshop after workshop, webinar after webinar, we find that this is the hardest thing because you want to come out and say, but here's reality, and here's my reasoning why we have the right thing and they have the wrong thing. And it just turns out that this just is not tremendously effective unless you're really, really good at it, or unless you have a willing audience. There are some ways to do it. So keep that in mind. The other thing is know your audience. And the first thing I'll say is you are not your audience. You're not writing for you. You know, sometimes, you know, I fall for it. I sit there and go, gosh, this is really a great paragraph. I'm pretty cool, you know, and I'm really saying this great. And then I read it and I go, you know what? Nobody's going to listen to that garbage. So, you know, I'm not the audience. I have to remember that. Also, people on our side are generally not the audience, unless you're organizing, you're building community and you're talking to your people. But in most cases, we're trying to talk to voters. So people that are already on our side are not necessarily our audience. Just things to keep in mind. We talked about right sizing it, about the size, you know, how many characters and words. So that's important to remember. You can tell in a publication by just looking at their letters what they let people get away with. You also should have a goal. And this can take a couple of different you know, characteristics here. You know, what do you want the reader to say to themselves after hearing your message? That's a good thing to think about when you're thinking about your goal. What should they remember or feel? What emotion do you want them to leave with? And maybe what action should they take? All of those things may impact the goal that you come up with, but it's a good idea to have one. And Catherine says, I heard a good quote, sell them the brownie, not the recipe. That's a good one. That's exactly, that's a great way to put it. I got to remember that. I'm going to steal that if that's all right. So have that goal. Okay, here's another really important step that's really easy to miss, and that's brainstorming. And this can be a fun phase, but this is sitting back and going, just taking the time to simply brain dump onto the page what you're thinking about this issue, what you think people want to hear about it, or what you think might be persuasive, words you might want to use. There aren't a whole lot of rules during brainstorming. The main rule is to just get as much as you can out onto the paper that has something to do with the issue and the message you want to make. The purpose here is not to hone your writing skills to a fine point. It's not to worry about grammar or spelling. It's to figure out what really needs to be said about the topic, and also what's not helpful. And we go into that a lot more in our workshop and in some of the webinars we've had, but there are a lot of things we do that don't help in what we're doing. So again, just let it out. No particular order, no ideas too stupid or crazy. Don't worry about spelling, grammar, typos, just think, type. Then when you're done, you might let it sit a little bit, come back and read what you've written. Note the good ideas, you know, okay, that's pretty important. Or perhaps a good turn of phrase, make a note of that, circle it or whatever. And then maybe begin to put some order to your ideas. Think about where they belong, what might come first, what might be a good ending, what kind of maybe a logical order, your story arc, if you will, the arc through your message, and think about that. Again, you don't have to, this doesn't have to be perfect at this point. This is just trying to organize your thoughts around this thing. And then and you really want to look out for your most important point. And I think the most important point is the point that if left out would wreck your message. People wouldn't get what you're saying. That's I think an interesting way to think about it. And then remember to make your point and get out. Going on and on risks what salespeople call buying it back. If there's any people who've been in sales, heard that term before, you know what I mean. Somebody says, okay, I'll buy it. And you go, yeah, that's great. Yeah, you're going to like this because it does this, this, and this, and that. And then you end up buying it back because you tell them something that they didn't need to hear, and now they're rethinking things. And the big part of brainstorming is pruning. You know, what really out of this, all of this giant brain dump, what really needs to be said and what doesn't? Remember, 250 words. Okay, you want to make them as impactful as possible. So get used to dropping things, and that's important. We'll say a little bit more about that as we go on, but that brainstorming thing is very important. It's a part of the process I think you have to do before you write anything, but especially a letter to the editor and or a social media post or others. And I think you'll see why when I mentioned here I have some more tips here. One is be brief. Okay, and I think I'll get that point across by giving you 4 brief quotes. Here's one: the more you say, the less people remember. That's very important to understand when we're ready to just lay down 4,000 facts in front of people. If you can't explain something in a few words, try fewer. That's great advice. And here's one that is maybe a little prosaic. It is with words as with sunbeams. The more they are condensed, the deeper they burn. And so it's very important to be brief. And then the 4th one here is 4 basic premises of writing: clarity, brevity, simplicity, and humanity, which I thought fit in very well with what we talk about, talking about values, talking about people, how policies affect people. And then I'll just close the brief part with something I heard from an ad guy. And we were looking to market our video discs. Some people here are old enough to remember those. And we filled them up with pictures, still images for medicine and science and such. And we said, well, you got to tell people this, you got to tell people this, you got to tell people this. And the ad guy just goes, hold on. The art of advertising is giving things up. Says you just can't say all that in an ad. We've all seen ads like that. I know we've all seen literature pieces like that for candidates. There's just way too much on the page, and people are just not going to read it. And so it's important to, as you get used to giving things up, and as you write more, it's a little hard to do, but boy, when you do, you just watch your writing get so much better. It's just,
George?
it feels, yes.
Quick question. Of the 4 things you said, what was number 3?
Number 3 was, it is with words as with
No,
sunbeams.
I think it means the clarity, brevity.
Oh, I'm sorry. Simplicity
Okay.
and humanity. And so anyway, so that's brief is important. Always keep that in your head, because it's so easy to get off into not brief. Okay, some other wonderful tips that picked up here and there.
George, Barb has her hand up again.
Oh yes, Barb.
You're muted, Barb.
Barb, do you have a question, or is your hand just still up? Okay, well, we'll let Barb figure it out.
Here we go.
Oh, there you are.
Am I
Okay.
unmuted?
Yes.
You are now.
All right. Okay. Back in 2012, President Obama was running for re-election, 2011. And I posted on DFL, Yahoo site that Republicans work for millionaires and billionaires, Democrats work for you. And Jackie Spear loved me. And she said this should be on every billboard in America. And anyway, I was on President Obama's conference calls every Tuesday for a year in his Chicago headquarters. And the point is that you guys are making is keep it short and to the point. And Democrats go on and on and on with policies, issues, this, that. And Republicans have a 4-word bumper sticker, always. And they wind up, their message gets across. And our message needs to be short and to the point.
Mhm.
And, we're talking about letters to the editors, and they can go on and on and on. But like George said, get your message out there and keep it. Here are your focus points and make them work. Like a bullet point, like a 4-bullet point. Here it is, bing, bing, bing. So when they fold up that newspaper, they remember what the Democrat has said rather than what the Republican
Right.
has said.
Yep, you're right,
And
Barb.
that is the messaging that we have to do. Short, to the point, boom, boom, boom.
Yep.
And you remember that, because
Yep.
we always get lost in the big policy issue, the big 1,200 page law thing trying to be passed. Nobody reads that. Nobody pays attention.
Yep, exactly. Yeah,
It's bullet points, it's 4 words, it's a bumper sticker, it's Democrats work for you. Or
and we have to, and we have to, it's so important to do that, because if you have if you're making too many points, people just aren't going to remember any of them. If you're making
Correct.
one point, but you have a good arc to your writing, you make it compelling, you show, how this affects people, because people want to know from what you're saying, what's in it for me. And if you're doing that and you're making one really strong point, you make your other points on another day, but give them that seed to sit in their brain and move forward with it. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so let's okay, so here's another one. Write for 6th graders, not because people are stupid, but because it gets to the heart of the matter quickly and focuses your attention on what really matters. And you've heard this before, that people have a 6th grade reading level. That's not why you do it. I think this is another good exercise, like trying to write tweets, that makes you really get right down to the nitty gritty. Another one, don't just tell people what you think, tell them why you care. That's very important, because that'll give them an idea of why they might want to care. You also want to state your point up front. If it takes too long to get to it, people lose interest. And this is a quick story. When I came to Minnesota directly from graduate school in Nevada, where I worked on a research project. And anyone who's worked on a research project knows, if you're writing a scientific paper, you start out with your hypothesis, then you start out by talking the history of of this particular issue, and then after that you present your data, and then you analyze your data with statistics, and eventually at some point you come to a conclusion at the end of things. So I come into the business world, and I'd be in a meeting and I go, well, this has been a problem for a long time, and here's what people have done to solve this problem. And so I thought this might be a good way to do it. So what I'm doing is, and I'm going on, and I get to the end, and they go, and I said, so this is what we should do. And the boss goes, why don't you just say that up front? If I want to know why, I'll ask you. I thought it was a great lesson, state your point first. Then this is because it's a great way to open a conversation. You state your point, you say what you need to say, and you get out of there. And if, especially when you're one-on-one, all of a sudden people will go, what do you mean by that? And now you got a conversation. That's what you're there for anyway. So there's that. Tell a story about real people. If you're a candidate, they have to be real people that you've spoken to, and or that who were present at a particular event. because then you'll always be authentic. Don't tell stories that are secondhand for you. But stories are inherently interesting. People will pay attention, and the story should illustrate the point you were making. Another thing you can do is use metaphors to help people understand a new or complex issue. The perfect example is the internet is like a superhighway. There are plenty others, but if you can find a metaphor for something, that's great. That's something I highly recommend reading up on metaphors. When you get good at that, that can be very powerful. And in fact, George Lakoff says it is that metaphor, actually, we couldn't think without it. And I read his books on it, and he's pretty much convinced me he's right. So it's a thought. Talk to the reader or the listener. The words you and me shouldn't scare you. A lot of people tend to get really official when they write something down. All of a sudden, they want to sound like their textbook from college. You don't need to do that. Talk directly to people. Say you and me. This is something we should care about. Our families, our community. Do not be afraid to do that. Practice that as much as you can. Here's another regular old writing tip, very important. Use active verbs rather than to run. Use running or run. That's another good one. Look up, just good grammar tips. Here's one that I find works really well. Experiment with your sentence, word, and paragraph order. I'm continually amazed as I do that it's like a wonder when you move a word or a sentence or a paragraph and watch the whole piece come together. All of a sudden, wait a minute, it's all the same stuff, but if I switch these two paragraphs around, it's better. And so play with that. These are things you can just play with as you're practicing writing. And this was, I'd say, be willing to excise great chunks of your lovingly birthed prose. The other way to do this is there's the statement you hear, you have to kill your darlings. And there's a longer quote to that. The idea being that you can get into a situation, happens to me, where I go, man, that's a damn fine paragraph. That is great. I really, really knocked that out of the park with that one. And then I come back and I look at this and what I'm trying to do in my goals and where it's going. And I go, it's great, but it doesn't belong here. It's got to go. And then you just erase it. And if you can't delete it, you just can't bring yourself to do it, make a separate document and put all that really cool stuff in there. You'll feel better and your writing will be better for it. But if it really doesn't belong there, don't leave it in. And then proofread. We mentioned before, have someone else read it and make corrections, and then proofread again. And the fermenting part. Writing needs to ferment. Leave it overnight and reread it before you send it. So there's that. And two more things here real quick. Avoid jargon. We on the left are masters of jargon. We have so many issue areas, and within each issue area, there's a whole special language that people in that area use, that they all know what they're talking about, but nobody else knows what they're talking about. This is something that we have to learn, that we have to watch this thing. Movements tend to just generate their own words and meanings that only they understand. They also tend to redefine words that have long established meanings. Which means that what happens is your words then set off some ideas other than what you intended in people's heads. And that's really important. We see some redefinition in one is defund the police. Defund the police. I remember when it came out and people started talking about it and everybody was up in arms. Oh my gosh, there's not going to be any more police. And so the people who were using it were going, well, okay, defund the police doesn't mean defund the police. What it means is, okay, well, that doesn't help. If your message is not what your message is, then don't say it that way. There are other ways to do it. Very important. So keep that in mind. And also, academic or technical language might make the writer feel smart, but it might make the listener feel dumb. or just confused because they don't know what you're talking about. So this is really important. Root out that jargon. I would put it. I think we had something in a previous webinar that Naomi Oreskes wrote in Scientific American, and it was her favorite was something about about making things simpler. And the name of the thing was is anti-obfuscation communication. It's like, why don't you just say, don't use jargon? Anyway, so there's that. And then lastly, the last tip, this is a good one, is an effective way to draw people into your message is to ask a question and then answer it. So already the form of what you're doing is a dialogue. And you ask a question, the person goes, well, okay, that's a question. So what's the answer? You've got them involved. You've hooked them in. They want to hear what the answer is. Whether they agree with it or not, they still want to hear what you have to say. So think about that one. I'll stop here and ask about any questions that we might
Yep.
have.
George, Amalia has a question.
Amalia?
Yeah, it's Amalia or Amy. How about Amy? Okay.
Oh, Amy,
Um,
okay.
Either one. I'm sorry. Amalia.
I have a question. The different things that you mentioned, like think of the paper that, which kind of paper to write to and the audience you're trying to reach, and can you respond to an article or another opinion. It struck me that those are good ways of seeing if you're, well, it has to do with, so you have to select a good topic. It's not just how you frame it.
Right.
But I remember from a friend who took a public speaking course and they got a really low grade because they chose an abominable topic. You can write really, really well, but is it the kind of thing that should be in anything like a newspaper? Or
Yeah.
would it need to be, say, a one-on-one thing? Or
Yep.
I don't know how else you would get it across. And also the question that you made a good point about, don't get too much into the weeds. One thing I was thinking about was I'm on the leadership board of a group that works, I guess you'd say that works for improved freight rail safety. And think about the weed, think about all the details of that and how are people going to care. Think of the number of oil trains and ethanol trains. Minnesota's just a hub. You have to wait till there's an event. You have to tie it to an article. You could tie it to a bill. But in general, it might not be the kind of thing that you could even write to the paper about. There has to be a real action connection here. Like, for example, there was back when Lac Mégantic blew up in Quebec from an oil train in 2013. So their anniversary was a good thing. If anybody remembers it, and now they don't.
Yep.
So you wait for something to come up that you can try and get people to relate to. But it's not necessarily the kind of thing that on any given day I can sit down and write about, even if I feel very strongly about it.
That is really insightful. It really is. Yeah, I don't think I could state it any better. That's really important. There's a right timing for what you're doing, and I like this idea of waiting for the right time. And
well, they recently had what I was thinking of. They recently, the U.S. Department of Transportation was accepting public comments. And I thought, and I wrote a really good letter, but the point is there was nothing to tie it to other than the request for comments. What could I get local people here in the Twin Cities to write to the Star Tribune, the biggest paper, or maybe even the local paper? There's like 350,000 people that live along Bakken crude oil routes. Well, that's nice, but they lived there yesterday. They're going to live there tomorrow. It's really hard to find the right time. And somebody else wrote in on the particular issue, and they didn't hit it quite right, but I couldn't quite think of a way to respond to it without saying, well, that was a nice letter, but it was on my side, but I just had to let it go.
yeah, that's that's something that I hadn't put in here and hadn't thought about. I think you're absolutely right. there are times when you want to say it and it's just not the right time for it. It's not going to do anything. People aren't going to pay it any attention. And yeah.
And also, I did find something today in a newsletter that the Inspector General of the Federal Railroad Administration has said that railroad track inspection is poorly. It's the requirements. They don't have any requirements. They have suggestions, and even those aren't followed, and they don't work out well. And okay, I could take that angle of it, but I don't want to be accused of trying to scare people out of their wits because a town in Quebec blew up 7 years ago. I mean, it's
Right.
partly timing, and you have to have things to tie it to.
Yeah, you have to. That's true. Just pontificating on a subject because it happens to cross your mind may not be the best candidate for a letter.
It
Yeah.
made a great little note to the people in my group,
Yeah,
in my organization, but for me to go try and go public with it, it would look like I was trying to scare people out of their wits for no reason. And there's lots of reasons you can hurt your own cause.
that's for sure. Well, thanks, Amalia. That's really important. Thanks for bringing that up.
George, I just, people are having to leave now and people are jumping off.
Yep.
I just want to say we are going to be sending out some information, but I did want to say something about the identifiers that we talked about at the very beginning that Barb brought up about the woman, the state representative in Michigan, Mallory, and we're going to send that out to everybody if you haven't seen it. And she used a whole bunch of identifiers to identify herself. And she did that for a reason, and that's because she was trying to make a point. It's not bad to use identifiers for yourself if you want to, like I could say, I'm a white cisgender woman. I'm a white, woman who practices humanism or whatever. But it needs to make sense for who you're talking to. So, and it's one thing if you want to say that you're a Christian and the Democratic Party meets your values, but what you cannot say is that the Democratic Party is a Christian party or that they have democratic values, because that's not it. Like people have said in the chat, the Democratic Party is a very big tent, and there's many different religions represented. And like, I wouldn't probably in Brooklyn Park here where I live, use religion as a way of identifying myself, because pretty much every religion is represented here in Brooklyn Park. So it wouldn't make any difference, but in other areas that might make a difference to identify yourself as a certain religion or race or gender identity and things like that. So just be thinking of your audience too.
Yeah, and I think it's fine to declare, who you are and what you believe. That's great. Way to go. I want to share one more thing before we go, because I did mention the other methods here. I'm going to share a screen here with you. Okay, so this here, we've talked a lot about letters to the editor, but let's take a look at some of the other one-to-many types of communication. And this is really the last thing that we need to talk about. Letters to the editor, what I've got in as the example here, there's the reach, and is it linkable, easily linkable? Does it have the potential to go viral? And is it effective? Is it an effective mode? So letters are pretty good on reach. You get to the people. You generally, if it's a local paper, it's a local issue, you're getting the local people. Same for a big paper, you're getting to a wider audience. It's linkable because so many things are going online now, but maybe not so much as other things. There's no picture with it and all that. Its ability to go viral is probably limited and all that. I won't read every one of these, but notice that like a lawn sign is also a one-to-many kind of communication. I think it has good reach. It is not linkable, so it gets a red check. It's not going to go viral because it's just a sign. And is it effective? I put it yellow because it's in between. That there's no bigger argument on the Democratic side as to whether lawn signs are effective or not. But there's that. So this is just a little bit. We'll have this in the follow-up also, but think about that and note here that social media checks all the boxes in there. You can get good reach out of it. It is easily linkable and shareable. It has the very real potential to go viral, and it can be very effective. So whereas if you look at websites don't really have a whole lot of pluses. Candidates way overthink their websites. A website is, here's my name, here's how you get in touch with me, here's some very generic things about what I believe, so that the reporter that comes there can get some information to write an article on you. Otherwise, your websites, you don't want to spend hours and hours on those. They're not going to help. So that's kind of what, oh, and then in person is also an interesting one, in that you don't have great reach. You're talking to 20 or 30 people. It's not linkable. It can't go viral. However, it can be very, very effective. So if you know, that's a good reason to use it. So anyway, that's, just wanted to leave you with that. So anyway, please, if you have some ideas or comments, let us know. Again, let me know what you think of this idea of having office hours, and if you would be willing to, or if this would be something you would use, and that you tell your candidates out and drag them over to be there to do it. And again, they have their lit pieces they're working on. Those are just the kind of people we want there. And we're also thinking of having other experts in at the same time. You know, me and Antonia, but I'm also looking at the folks in Michigan and Chicago and other places. So that's all I have.
One more quick question, George. Social media. Do you mean Facebook, Instagram, Twitter? Is there anything else you were thinking of?
You know, there's so many different kinds of social media. I haven't been on Facebook very often because it just makes me mad. But and also because Mark Zuckerberg is just evil. But yeah, you know, one thing I could say is there may be social media like things in a smaller group. For example, whatever state you're in, you have a state central committee, and there's usually a listserv involved in that. Now, these are people who you agree with. Well, wait a minute, I'll take that back. In Minnesota, our state central committee list is just, sometimes it resembles a boxing match, but there are people who agree with you. It is a way to get information out. It's another one-to-many thing. So that's a thought. But maybe there's another group, or your environmental group, or maybe you can get away with some of this in groups that are not political. So it might be worth looking at that. There are so many different social media things out there, opportunities. Whatever one works for you, you know, go for it. All right, so really happy to have everybody here. One thing that we miss that I really wish you would do is please send us an email, or send us an email and let you know what you think. We in all our in-person workshops, we always passed out evaluation forms, and we read every single one of them. And I can't tell you how many changes we made in our workshops because of those forms. We don't get that here. So please don't be afraid to say, you know, that was pretty good, but this part really sucked. We're cool with that. Please tell us. If you don't tell us, we can't fix it. So anyway, thanks everybody. And what's next up, Lisa? Hobie?
We have Hobart Stocking's going to be talking to us about messaging on the climate change on May 16th, I believe. It was 2 weeks from today.
If you haven't heard Hobart speak, or Hobie Stocking speak, he's been in the webinars quite a bit. If you haven't heard him and you're into the environment, you have to hear Hobie. He's probably the best environmental communicator I've ever met. He's an expert in framing and messaging, and he's a really fun. So, okay, folks. Everybody have a fabulous evening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks,
Bye,
George.
everybody. Thank
Okay.
you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
connectionslab.org